Hello, this is a documentary and look at the current political landscape of our country. We are currently at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. A once united nation is now seeing the rippling effects of a decades-long buildup between our citizens' ideals. While something that we should become a more progressive nation, some feel like we should keep things the way they are. These ideological divides, along with technological advancements that make news and information widely available and easy to access, has led to passions over politics at an all-time high. As a result, recent tragic events and economic despair has led to an outbreak of political violence. With recent examples like Charlottesville and deaths due to protests of racial inequality, it has begun to reach a boiling point with the future of our nation's political landscape being in very foggy view. Thus, the ultimate goal of this review is to examine the intolerance of our current political situation and the effects it has on the cultural war happening between the ideologies. To begin, we must first ask ourselves, what is political intolerance? Tolerance is defined by the willingness to extend the basic human rights and decencies to people or groups who have different viewpoints than our own. Alternatively, intolerance is when a group or individual is unwilling to extend any benefit of the doubt towards someone with an opposing viewpoint than them. One of the main causes of this problem is the rise of extreme ideology, says Lori Oakes, a political scientist. Oakes did an analysis on the rise of intolerance in America as an outsider from Australia. What she found is that the moderates are slowly becoming the minority and partisan politics rules. One major example of this she found is the harsh reaction to Barack Obama's health reform bill. Congressmen and many other people in the government received death threats from right-wing activists. They were not the only party guilty of this, however. George Bush received similar treatment and was booed off stage by Democrats during a State of the Union address, as well as multiple other harsh criticism due to his war in Iraq. Next, to build on this idea of political intolerance, we must also analyze the growing divide between the two political ideas in America. Crook Clive, another political scientist, found some first observations in that liberals and conservatives tend to live completely different lives. They wear different clothes, listen to different music, and watch different forms of entertainment. In another idea proposed by Christopher Clausen and James L. Gibson, our democracy, which is based on a pluralistic society, creates a culture where every voice can and should be heard. However, we are starting to see an increase in the intolerance of more moderate ideals. For example, the increasing intolerance of conservatives on college campuses is extremely worrying. Their theory also proposes that there are two reasons for the rise of political polarization. The first is that intolerance towards one group eventually leads to legislation against them due to mass protest. The greatest effect of these laws, however, is the fact that it adds fuel to an already large fire that is politically intolerant culture. This climate of control eventually leads to a discouragement of citizens with minority viewpoints to speak out. This is called the spiral of silence. Anyone now who has any sort of dissenting opinion is slowly becoming an enemy when we should be listening to them. While some of our cultural decisions influence division, the media has also played a large role in this issue. In recent years, media bias is becoming ever more apparent. Ultimately, this has led to a massive increase in political information, leading to an increase in conspiracy theories. One of the main factors of this is the distrust of the media. In recent years, the overall distaste towards the media has been accelerated, with President Trump calling the media the enemy of the people. Due to this, people put their blind trust in certain outlets of alternative forms of media that give out false information on the daily. Example of this includes outlets like InfoWars. Another example of the spread of misinformation is the fake news issue with Facebook in the 2016 election. During election season, even from my personal experience, the website became filled with mostly pro-right-wing propaganda. While looking at the effect the media has, we can also examine what political misinformation has done to people and their political ideas. A study generally showed that people are not as extreme when they are shown correct information. To follow up on this, the study was analyzed, which was called Zahler's Receive Accept Sample Model of Influence. This study aimed to test how people reacted to seeing a certain political message over and over again based on how sophisticated they were or on how much prior knowledge they had on the topic. The model's first finding was that people with more liberal views tend to move to a more conservative idea when they have no prior knowledge and are exposed to talking points. Alternatively, when conservatives were shown these messages, if they were extremists in view, they tended to lean more moderate, while the others tended to stay put on their ideas. This study suggests that people can be very influenced by media interpretations of events, thus causing their ideas to skew. Finally, after going through the roots of political polarization, we must also look at the effects and impact. In Charlottesville in August of 2017, we saw the start of a violent outbreak. A Unite the Right rally was planned. Unexpectedly, however, counter-protests began. Fights, riots, and all-out brawls occurred, which eventually led to many serious injuries, including a death due to a car running through a crowd of protesters. After this, it led people to ask themselves if politics wasn't just an idea or a view, but something that has to do more with a person's morals and character. After a couple of years of relative peace, things began to once again boil over to a much larger scale in 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, people became more restless due to mandated lockdowns and the feeling of loneliness. This caused a breaking point when protests broke out over police brutality and the killing of George Floyd. While the majority of protests were peaceful and extremely impactful in supporting the reform movement to one of our nation's most flawed institutions, some of them turned extremely violent. Small businesses were looted all over the place, police stations were torn apart, towns were destroyed, and people died. The establishment of an autonomous zone, however, in downtown Seattle was the single most striking part of this movement. From June 9th to July 1st, protesters unprecedentedly set up a completely independent state and wouldn't leave until their demands were met. Ultimately, it was shut down by law enforcement and the National Guard, but the aftermath was completely devastating. Political intolerance in America has its roots not only in our culture, but our way of life. Things like what we do, what we see, what we watch, or even what we eat all have an effect on what we express to others. Discourse is growing further and further apart. Even though political intolerance has been a part of our culture for years, we have simply ignored it. The polarization of this nation has done nothing but hurt us collectively, as potential ideas from both sides that could help our nation is being squashed in favor of partisan politics. In addition to this, the media is dividing us by becoming more of a political weapon rather than an informant of the facts. If we just start to listen to one another as a society, we can grow. The issues present today may be striking and imposing, but I feel like that as long as we can have tolerance for one another and find unity, we can overcome them. To quote former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, it's not right or left, it's forward.